The next step is to create our style guide. Now, previously, in the previous module, we worked with an existing style guide, the Relume style guide. But in this case, I actually think that if we're going to start with an existing style guide, we're not going to end up using about 90% of it. And so it's just a waste of code in our project. It's much easier if we just create a minimal style guide for what we actually need, because the design that we have here is really non-traditional. So let's review the design together so that we can think together, what do we need in a style guide? Now, in this case, in this website, I've already went ahead and created the style guide here. Sometimes you will have a style guide existing. Sometimes if you're the designer, if you're working with a designer that doesn't have it, you will need to create this. And this is, now I want to show you how I'm thinking about this. So let's first of all review the design that we have here. We have the design for the homepage. Basically, we have here a video background and a huge logo. So we don't even have kind of like a big H1 heading one that we typically have in a header. We do have a little bit of a text about them here, but we don't have a typical heading. Now, in this case, in the second section, we do have a heading for the section. So this is probably an H2. But if we're moving into the next section, here we have a heading for the section, so that's probably also H2, but that looks completely different. And then the header of the next section looks completely different. So as you can see, we don't have that much consistency in the types of headings that we have. Let's actually review everything. So we have the hero, we have these two bars, sliding bars, then we have this slider, then we have this full screen basically promoting the members area, and then we have a calendar, and then we have the footer that we have here. So let's see, and what other pages do we have? We have the full-on navigation that we have here, which looks completely different, not the same sizes that we have in different pages. And then the internal pages, we have the member zone, which does have kind of like a more traditional, I guess, heading one, and a description, buttons, and then this slider again. Okay, and then we have a dedicated page for just a sport with just a list, and then we have the page with the video where we do have the same heading one, and yeah, just a slider. So we do see that we can reuse this H1, that although we don't have in the homepage, we can treat that as the basic H1 for the website. We'll need to override it, perhaps here, or actually we just don't have an H1 in the hero of the homepage. So we can treat that as the H1, and I've put that here as heading number 1. For heading number 2, I chose to treat these recent event as heading number 2, although here we'll need to override it, and here we'll need to override this, and here we'll just use the same style, although it's not an H2. So that's that. So I've created that as well. What else do we have here? The heading 3 is actually the event name. So we can see that we have this style repeating itself, the name of the event that we have here, which we can treat as heading number 3, and we're going to be reusing it here as well. So we have 3 main, I guess, typographic elements that we have here. Let's take a look at the buttons. So in terms of buttons, we do have, first of all, we can see that they are quite of a unique buttons. Number 1, they have an icon. Number 2, they have this kind of like cut corner. So we're going to see how to create those in a second. And there's basically 4 variations. So the normal one, a white one, and then 2 without a background, but with 2 colors. Okay, so we've got those. What else do we have here? Usually we have a container, right? Most of the text is contained in the middle of the website. Here we almost don't have that. Some of these, actually a lot of these sections are just edge to edge, or there's a little bit of space on the left, but it's kind of like scrolling infinitely into the right. So we don't even need a container here. So you can see many of the things that we have, if we took an existing style guide, wouldn't be usable here. So it's very, very minimal what we need, right? We need basically 3, or if you include body text, and there's sports name, which is body text, but in all caps and a little bolder. We have basically 5 typographic styles. We have 4 buttons. We've got the colors, which we will reuse. And sometimes we want to override the text color. In some cases, for example, let's see where we have this. Here, for example, we want the text to be black instead of the normal gray. Here, we might want the text to be green instead of the white. So we have a few times where we'll override the text. So it's worth creating the text color global classes. Okay, I think that's basically it. So let's go ahead. Over here, we have basically the mock-up for an intro animation. We'll review that when we'll build the hero. But for now, let's start off with building this style guide. Now, first thing we need to do usually is load the font. And I do want to talk about the font that we have here. It's a font that is called, and you can see the font if you're working in Figma. You can select this by command clicking inside of a group, and you can see the class, and we can edit this to see what it is. So here you can see that the font is ANIC Latin, and that's a Google font, which you can see here, and we're going to download it from here. This is a variable font. A variable font basically means that usually we have separate files for, the light font and the normal font, and we have to upload these files separately. But in a variable font, it's one font that can be calculated. So you can see this variable font has 2 axes here, the weight in terms of how light and how bold it is. So the single font includes all of these different variations, and we can select that particular one that we need. Also, it has another axis for width, so it can be either very condensed or very extended. So that's very cool, and you can do pretty cool things with it. Here's just an example of how you can use that to animate, and we will use that. So it's going to be very cool to use a variable font. So let's get started by uploading it. Now, I'm following up from the previous video. I already have the content inside. If you want to duplicate the file that with the data from the previous video, you can do that right now. Or if you've built this on your own, let's go ahead to the site settings so that we can load the font. And you have the font available below the video as well. I'm going to go here into the fonts, upload the font. Let's go here and pull this. Not copy it, but just pull it here. Okay. And it's uploading. I'm just going to fix the name, Anik Latin. Okay. So upload this font. We're good. Yep. Fantastic. It's uploaded. We can go back to the designer. Okay. So to build a style guide, I'm going to create a page and I'm going to make sure that it's not visible. So let's add a new page. Let's call it style guide. And I'm going to save it as draft. Okay, so we have it, and we have this icon to see that it's not really visible. First thing I want to do before I even start building is actually select the background color. And you can see here that the background color is this color. So I'm just going to copy this color from the background, make sure that I'm on the body and that I'm editing the body of all pages, the HTML tag. I'm just going to go here below, and I'm going to change the background color. I'm going to paste the color in here. That's great. I can already go ahead and set the default font on the website. So let's pick the Anik Latin. And now the fonts in here are basically in pixels. So let's go ahead and translate them to REM so that they're, so that they're accessible. And you can see, again, the text styles. If you click here, you can see that it's not very accurate here, 16.7. Let's round that. So 16 pixels is usually 1 REM, and we can do the pixel to REM. There's a calculator. That's going to be just easy. So if it's 16, it's going to be 1 REM. So let's go back to our website and make sure that the default font is going to be 1 REM. That's great. Height, let's do 1.1 REM. We'll see how that looks. Otherwise, we're going to change that and set the color to white. Is the default is completely white, or is it a little bit of a different white? No, it's actually the white. Okay, but we're going to anyway create global colors in a second. Okay, so we've defined the basic body copy of all the pages and the body. Let's go ahead, just for organizational purposes, I'm going to put everything inside of a section with these titles, just so that it's a little bit organized. So I'm going to drag in a section, and I'm going to call this, not actually a section, actually a container, just to put this nicely in the middle. Call this style guide contain, and give it a little bit of spacing, and bring in some kind of a text element, text block, enter a text block. Let's call this typography, just so that we have things organized. I can give this some kind of a class, style guide heading, and make it a tiny bit bigger, and give this a bottom border of white. Pretty one to the bottom, not to the sides. Yeah, let's see if that looks okay. That looks okay. I'm going to give it a little bit of padding and a little bit of margin. That's it. That's just for organizational purposes. So we can create these different sections. So we have heading, we have buttons, color, text color. So buttons, copy paste, colors, and then text colors. And I think that's it. Okay, so let's start with the heading. We need an H1, H2, H3. By the way, you can just enter them by hitting Command D and just write H1. That'll add an H1. Add an H2, and add an H3. So let's start by styling them. Heading 1 needs to be, now what you want to make sure when you're looking at this style is, because this is a variable font, you can see here that it has a weight and it has a width as well. So this one is 700 and width 75, and it's 88. So what is 88? Looks like 5.5. So let's do the heading and change that to all heading. And I'm going to set that to, what was it? 5.5 REM. 5.5 REM. Oh, not pixel, REM. Great. And this is maybe 5.6, I guess, REM. Something like this. Now we also note that this is uppercase, so we want to make it uppercase, and we're going to hit the more type options and going to choose uppercase here. Now you can see it's much wider than what we have here because they chose the narrow font. And you can see here in the variation, that's something that we only have when this is a variable font. I'm going to click it, and now I can see that I have a weight, and I can play around with this. I'm going to set this to 700, and we've got the width, which is how wide it is. And I'm going to set this to 75. Okay, so we've got heading 1 ready. Let's see what we have in heading 2. So in heading 2, I'm command clicking to select this, and let's check out heading 2. This one doesn't have a width. Okay, so just width of 75, and okay, let's do it. So this is going to be heading 2. Now heading 2, yeah, I'm wondering if to add a class, will we be using it on something that is not an actual H2? Yeah, so you can see this one, we're going to be using it on all events and show me. So those are things that are not necessarily an H2 element. So I'm going to add a class to this. I'm going to add this H2 class so that I can add this to elements that are actually not H2 if I want them to look the same. So let's go ahead and make this uppercase as well. Let's go ahead and make this narrow as well. And how big is it? How big is the H2? Let's check it. Where's the style guide? So this is 60. So what is 60? 60 is 3.75. Okay, let's do 3.75 REM. Let's do also 3.8 REM here. And this looks way too bold, so let's give this a try at, I think here, normal, which is why I guess we didn't see which weight it had. Okay, so this looks good. Now we have heading 3. And heading 3 as well, I'm going to add a class to this because this is going to be on event name. So I'm going to call this, actually I'm just going to call this event name because we'll be using it and sometimes it's not going to be an H3. So what is this? This is 775 on 41. What is 41? 41 is 2.5. Okay, so 2.5 REM. And then let's set this to 2.6 REM. And let's make this uppercase. And let's make this 700 and then 75. Okay, we've got those 3. Then we have body text. So let's add a paragraph or just a text element, text block. Okay, we don't want this to be white. I guess it's getting the white from, what is it getting the white from? Maybe it's getting the white from this style guide or what? What's giving this? Body all pages is white. Okay, so this is actually wrong. I don't want the body copy to be white. I want it to be this gray. So let's actually go back to the body and change that from white to this color. Okay. It's actually telling me that it's probably going to fail in terms of contrast ratio. So I'm going to make this a little brighter, yeah, so that we can get a better contrast ratio. Okay, so I'm going to keep the gray here this way, but now I do want to make sure that the H1 is actually white. Okay. H2 should also be white. H3 should also be white. Okay, so we've got the normal text, and then we need a support type. So this is, let's call this normal body text. Let's give these elements a little bit of padding, spacing from the top as well. And this is a normal text block, and this, the next one, let's call this sport name. And sport name, let's give this sport name. Sport name? Yeah, sport type. So sport type. Sport type. Let's make sure that it's uppercase and a little bolder. So not normal, maybe something like, yeah, semi-bold. Okay, so this is great. We'll need to reuse sport type. We'll have that available. This one is event name. This one is H2. This one doesn't have anything. So, okay, we are good. Okay, we're good with the typography. Let's move into the buttons. Okay, previously, we've been using buttons, the actual Webflow button. And you'll see if I put this in here, we can use that. Actually, we can't use this. And the reason that we can't use this is you can see here, it's a button. I can't put anything inside of it. And in this case, as you can see, we have an icon that we want to use. So we can't use that. So we need to actually create a custom button, which will turn into a component so that we can reuse again and again. So how are we going to create this? Let's go ahead and bring in not a div, but a link block. Okay, so basically a div that is linkable. And inside of it, we're going to add just a normal text. So let's add a text element into it. Okay, you can see that the text automatically became kind of blue because if you remember the web back in the 90s, a normal link, the default of links is to be blue and underlined. Now we don't want this, so let's give this a class. Let's call this button and let's give this a little bit of padding and this green background. Actually, you know what? Let's do the colors first so that when we're creating the buttons, we can use the global colors. Because if later we want to change the colors, we want the buttons to change as well. So let's skip the buttons for a second and let's go and create the colors. So we know these are going to be global colors. So let's set them up as variables. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors here. So let's go ahead and start setting them up. Color, first one is white and is it full white? Yeah, it's really actually white. So don't have to change anything. New color, not white. Let's go to this green and let's copy from Figma the color here. So this one, let's paste the value here and let's change the color name to green. Actually, we didn't name this first white color, so let's call it white. Next color is purple. So let's pick this up from Figma and set this up as purple. Paste this, name purple. All right. And next one is pink. I'm going to select it, pick the color, and new variable, pink. One more is going to be gray. Pick that up. Color, gray. And the last one is black, which is not true black, but it's a very dark shade of gray, and call this black. Now, while we're in the variables panel, I want to think about what other variables we're going to have throughout the website. And there's one thing that I'm thinking about. There's the padding that we have here recurring throughout the website. And you can see it here. It's, I think, 70 pixels between the elements and the sides of the website. Now, in a lot of websites, we have a container that basically manages it. But in this website, sometimes you will see that, we have the padding on both sides, and sometimes in the case of this slider, for example, we only have it from the left side, so we can't really use a container for all of them, and we're going to be reapplying the 70 pixels padding again and again throughout this website. So it makes sense to save this padding as some kind of a variable. So I'm going to go ahead and create a size variable, and I'm going to call this, edge padding, and I'm going to set this to 70 pixels. Now, I've said this in earlier videos, variables were introduced right as I was wrapping up the recording of this course, so you won't actually see me applying this variable when I'm building, but now that you know that I've created it, you will understand how much more efficient it would be when I could just pull in this variable every time I need to set up, the 70 pixels of the padding or the colors instead, and I'll be able to, of course, change it globally if I ever want to change it to 50 or to 100 or something like this. Okay, now that we've got the variables, let's go ahead and put them inside of nice, blocks of colors for visibility and so that we can see them. So to have these blocks rearranged one next to each other, let's go ahead and go back to the page. Let's add here some kind of a div block that I'm going to call a color block. Set this up as, 100 pixels width and height. Let's wrap this in horizontal flexbox so that I can copy these and they're one next to each other. And we've got 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And for this flexbox, let's give a little bit of spacing, a little bit of gap between these. Okay, so now let's add a class that we can apply as a background. First one we can just call white, and that's going to set up the background color and we're going to pull in from the variable. So let's pull in white. For the second one, let's do a green and pull in the green color. For the next one, let's do purple and pull in from the purple. Next one, let's do pink and pull in from the pink color. The next one, what is the next one? It's gray. Pull in from the gray color. And the last one is the dark black. Let's call it black. And it's going to be the black color. Okay, now we can continue to the buttons. And this link block, let's give it the class of button. And let's give it a background color. And now I can pick from my global colors. Okay, so I've got this. Let's give it a little bit of a padding so it will look like a button. Let's drag from all sides using Option and Shift and call this button. Okay, now it does look blue with an underline, which we need to change. So inside of button, let's go into text decoration and remove the underline. So no text decoration. And color, what do we need it to be? We need it to be actually black, and we need this to be semi-bold and 1 rem. Okay, so let's change the text color to this black. Let's make it semi-bold. Let's make it 1 rem already. Let's make it uppercase. Okay, so we've got them. Actually, we need more padding. So let's give it a little bit more padding this way and more padding this way. So we've got them. Now we need to bring in this icon. So in this case, I'm just going to copy this as SVG and paste it. And because I have the Relume Chrome extension, I can just paste it. Otherwise, I would need to bring in an embed element, which is basically what we have here now. To organize them one next to another, let's turn the button into a flex box. Now, this might look weird for a second because the button takes up the whole space, but we'll figure this out in a second. For now, what I want to make sure is that these two are aligned. So I'm going to make sure that the flex box is centered. So this looks good. And I'm going to give them a little bit of space between them, a little bit of a gap, something like 10. That looks great. Now, why I don't care that the button is trying to take up most of the space is because usually this button is going to be inside with other elements or inside of a button group. So let's actually wrap this in a div block as if this was in kind of a button group. Let's call this button group. And usually it's within a button group that organizes it in a flex box. And then it's trying to, you see, shrink to its normal size. So it's always going to be, and if we have more text here, it's going to grow. So this is fine. I'm not too worried about that. Now I've got this button here, and that is great. However, you can see that I have this cut corner here. And now it's a good time to ask ourselves, how are we going to do this? How are we going to create this cut corner? And in this case, what I would usually do is Google CSS cut corner, because this is not something that we can do natively with the Webflow UI here. So we need an additional code. Now, if you Google CSS cut corner, you'll get to multiple tools that help you generate this code. Here's the one that I've picked, CSS Generator. Basically allows you to do all kinds of cut corners. What I want is actually this one. And what I want is the bottom right corner. So let's select that. And let's scale this down because our button is going to be something around this. So this corner is obviously not what we want. We want this to be straight line, so exactly 180 degrees. And let's try here 20 pixels or maybe even 10 pixels. I think that looks similar to what we want. So basically, this tool gave us this custom code here, CSS code. And I'm going to copy that. And let's go ahead and try that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here into our pages, and I'm going to go into our site setting, and inside I'm going to go here into the custom code. Now to add custom styles, I'm going to basically write style, and then I have to end this. So we do backward/style, and then I'm going to paste this inside. And basically it's using something called ClipMath. I would never know how to write this myself, so it's great that I can copy this. But this, what it says here, box, is basically the class that we are targeting. In our case, it's called button. So I'm just going to change this box to button so it knows what to target. Now I'm saving this. Can't see anything in here. But let me go ahead and publish this and test this out and see if this actually works. Let's open this up. Page is not found. Now, of course, because our page is invisible. So let's set this to publish for a second and publish this. Let's go ahead and open that. Okay, and now you can see that we do have a corner, and it looks pretty much like we need. Maybe we even need to make this a little bit smaller than this. So let's go in here and let's make this maybe 7 pixels. Yeah, something like this. Okay, so this is great. We know that it works. We won't be able to see it inside of the Webflow Designer, but we know that when we publish the site, it works. Okay, so this is great. Now, because this is a class that we'll be using in all pages of the website, it doesn't make sense to have it on every single page. So let's cut this from here, from the style guide. And let's also bring this to save as a draft. And let's go into the site setting because we want this class to apply throughout the whole website. So let's go here into custom code, paste this here. And actually, I want to replace the code with the updated code. So let's copy that, go back and replace that. Let's click here, button, and then save changes. And then, okay. We assume it's going to work. Otherwise, we're going to come back and edit this later on. Now, before I move on to creating the variations of the button, I actually want to set up the hover interaction for this button because the variations will also have this, basically a variation of the interaction. Now, usually when we were creating hover interactions, we were creating them right here from this panel. But basically, this only limits us to making changes to the CSS properties. And in this case, I want to make something a little bit more elaborate. I want to basically have kind of like a highlight in the button that's running kind of like whew, making a swoosh over the button behind the text, kind of like a highlight, like a racing car that we've got here in this sports website. So I kind of want to make this swoosh moving behind. And to move an element, we actually have to use an interaction. It's not, we can't change any property from the CSS panel, right? From the styling panel. So basically what we'll have to do is we'll have to create this object, and we'll create basically a div that's moving around here in the background and will be masked by the actual button. So how are we going to do that? So let's go back here and let's add to this button, let's add another div to it. So I'm going to hit Command E, just a normal div, and let's call this button, highlight. Okay, now it's taking up space in the button itself, and that's obviously not something that we want. So what are we going to do? We're going to turn it into position absolute and make sure that its parent element, the button, is set to relative so that the highlight can be relative to it. And now let's give it a little bit of style. Let's make it something like, let's make it 100 pixels width and maybe a height of 10. We'll see in a second how this looks, and give it a background color of white. So now we have this kind of like a highlight. Maybe we'll make it 20 pixels height. And let's change it around. Basically, let's rotate it. Go here into the transition, rotate, and let's rotate the Z index kind of like this way. This is how we want it. And now we'll be able to basically move it around like this, swoosh, something like this. So we can start from here and then move it all the way up to here. That being said, before I do this move element, there's two things to think about. Number one, hey, we want the button to crop this. So let's go into the button and let's change the overflow to hidden. So everything outside of the button will be clipped. So now we basically have a mask. One thing that I can already see is that the highlight is on top of the button text. And even if I move it here to be rendered first, these two things need to come up on top of it. So this text block, let's call this button text, and let's turn this to relative just so that we have access to the Z index, and then we can set it to 2. Even if I didn't set it, you can immediately see it moved on top of it. And this icon, which we can rename button arrow, we can also change that into position and relative, and now both of them are going to be on top. Okay, now let's create the interaction. But one thing that we do want to consider when we're doing basically the interaction is that we're not sure what the width of the button is going to be, because it might have a lot of text, it might not have a lot of text. So we'll have to move the highlight around using percentage so that the animation will change if the size of the button changes. Let's move it around here into the left. Let's do something like minus 100% and see what that does. Minus 100% is kind of like all the way here. That's good. Okay, let's start here and then animate it in. So let's select our button and let's go into interactions, element trigger, because this is something that needs to happen only when I'm hovering on top of this, and let's create a mouse hover. So we have two animations, when we're hovering in and when we're hovering out. So let's start an animation and create a new one since we don't have anything. Let's call this button hover in. And when it's hovering in, what we want to do, let's first of all select the element that we want to animate, which is button highlight. Let's click here and let's move it from, first of all, it's telling us it doesn't know where to move. We want to move it all the way across here. Remember, we're at minus 100%. Let's see what happens if I do move it 100%. First of all, you can see, if I close this, that the rotation is gone, because when I'm adding interactions, I guess it's overriding the transitions that I've set in the CSS. So I'll have to rotate it as well. So actually, let's click this for a second and let's set the rotation. So let's make sure that we're selecting the element, button highlight, and let's click rotate. Not sure how much I rotated it. Maybe it was something like 45, minus 45. Okay, and let's make sure that this is set as an initial state. So it starts out rotating. Let's also set up the move for the initial state to minus 100%. We've already know this is where we want to start. And then we'll animate to 100%. You can see that it's not enough, 100%. So let's set it to 200%, maybe 300%. Okay, this seems okay. Let's click play. Okay, now you can see that it's moving, and I can set a duration. Maybe I want this to be 1, and maybe I want something like ease out Kubrick. I don't know. Let's give this a try. Okay, this looks like nice. This looks like a nice swishing highlight animation. The only thing I want to do is I actually want to blur it out a little bit. So I'm going to go here into the styles panel, and I'm going to go here into filters, and there's going to be a blur filter. Let's try 5%. Let's see what it does. Whoops, I've blurred the whole button. Undo, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to select the button highlight and add a filter of blur to the highlight. Let's preview this for a second. Now you can see that the blur was highlighted, but look what happens. I'm trying to hover again. It doesn't happen again. Why? Because now the highlight is hiding over here and there's nothing to move it right back here to the start. So we can do one of two things. We can either automatically jump it out, make sure that at the end of the interaction, at the end of the hover interaction, we're going to make sure that it jumps with 0 duration to its original position, or we can add an over out animation. So let's add an hover out animation, and let's call this button hover out, and just select the button highlight, and let's just animate it, move it back to its original position, which was minus 100%. Duration, again, 1 second, out, quad, don't remember what it was, save, and let's test this out. So move to the right. When I'm hovering out, it's moving to the left. Left, right, left, right, left. And now we've got this pretty cool hover interaction that we've created. And now we're going to create variation of this button. We can reuse this, and now we've got the whole structure, the button with the highlight, the button text, and the button arrow. Okay, so we've got this button down. I'm actually going to, because I don't want to make sure that I copy and paste it, it's not as if I can add a button and give it a class of button. I need to have this whole structure for every button. So it makes sense to turn this button into a component. So let's create this button main, we can call this. And we also want to enable people to actually edit the text, right? So you can see here they can actually edit the text, but we also want them to be able to edit the link. So let's edit this component, and let's go here into the link and make sure I'm going to click this, create, connect a new property. Let's call this link. And when people are going to use this component, they're going to be able to change the link. Actually, let's also add this button as button text. Let's call this button text. Now, when I'll be reusing this component, for example, I'm going to copy and paste this. Let's give this button group a little bit of spacing. Let's say this is a variation, not a variation, just another button, but this one will be another button. And I'll be able to choose a different link here. Let's see that. Oh, you can see here that the animation is not getting all the way to the end. So I guess using 100% didn't work out exactly as we wanted. So let's figure this out. I think I know what the problem is. We basically gave let's edit the component. We basically gave the button highlight a fixed width, right? It's 100%. And then we basically moved it to 100% or 300%. This 100% is relative to the size of this 100%. So it basically moved 100% of 100 pixels is 100 pixels, and then 300% is 300 pixels. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that the size of this highlight is actually dynamic in relation to how big the button is, right? If the button has more text, we need this width to be higher. So instead of 100%, let me actually change it to 100%. So it's basically going to be the size of the button. If the button is small, the width is going to be small. If the button is longer, then the width is going to be longer. And if I change that, now basically this is going to be changing. And then also the movement is going to be changing because the movement is being calculated based on the size of the width. Okay, let's give this a try and see if that works. So this one works, and this one works as well. They might be a little bit too fast, actually. I might want to go into the interaction. I'm going to edit the component, go to the interaction, and maybe just slow the animation down a little bit. So maybe just like 1.5, save, and the hover out, also 1.5. I think it will look a little bit better. And now let's try this. Yep, looks better. Yep, looks better. Okay. So we've got the main button. Now we want to have a variation where the button is white. So that's pretty easy. We can go ahead and duplicate this. Actually unlink this from the component. So unlink instance. Don't want this to be a component. And let's add a class here. I'm going to call this button white, I guess we can call it. And then just change the background to white. The text is the same. It's going to have the same. It's still a button, so it's going to get the cut corner. And it's also already has the interaction on it. So that's great. But one thing is that the highlight was white. Remember, so we need to change the color of the highlight in this one. So let's go to button highlight and do maybe green highlight, and change the background color here from this to, yeah. Yep. Green highlight is background. Let's test this out. Yep. So now we have a green highlight and we've got two types of buttons. I'm going to turn this again into a component, which I'm going to call button white, secondary, whatever. You can give it whatever name you want. And now we've got two more buttons that actually don't have this padding, don't have this cut corner and everything. So we can just go ahead and copy and paste this. Again, unlink this from the component. Instead of button white, I'm going to call this button ghost. And I'm going to remove the background for starters. So no background. The text is white on this one. So text is white. I also don't want the padding on the left, so I'm going to remove the padding on the left. The other padding I'm going to leave. I also don't need the highlights. So for this one, I'm just going to have, I think, a normal hover animation. I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove the hover interaction. And I'm just going to do a normal hover for this. So when it's hovered, let's change the text to green. That's great. The icon automatically changes color because it's embedded. Let's go back to the normal and going to go here into transitions, color, because that's what we're animating, basically. Where is it? Typography font color. And let's test this out. Okay, great. That works. And we can continue to the last variation, which is the same button, but with green text. So let's copy and paste that. And this one, instead of button ghost, I'll add another one. Let's call this green ghost. So it's a variation of the second button. So that's why we have two combo classes here, because I don't want to make all these changes again. I just want to change the text color to green. And actually, maybe when I'm hovering on top of it, instead of green, it's going to be pink. I don't know. Yeah, we can test this. So this one turns into pink. This one turns into green. And fantastic. We have finally... No, we have one more thing to do, the text colors, right? We want to make global colors that allow us to change the text color to black or to white or to green. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add some text element here, text block. We can have 3 of those, 1, 2, 3. The first one, let's call it text color black. And I can just go to the text color and change it to black. Now, I'm not going to see it here, and I can go ahead and organize things cleanly and nicely like we have here, but I'm a bit tired, so let's go ahead and just finish this and just do here text color white. So this is going to be text color white. And if you've watched the previous module, I'm trying to use the same naming conventions that they used, but I'm not trying to stick too much because I don't remember 100% of the naming. But I do remember text color white, so let's use text color white. And then the last one is text color green. So text color green. And that's it. We have our style guide. We have all of our, I can actually write here text color white if I want to be able to remember this later on. Text color green. For this one, should probably wrap it, in something. Let's call this text style guide, text background. I said I'm going to be lazy and not do it, but eventually I'm doing it just so that we'll be able to see what we have here. So let's give this a background color of white, just so we can see what's inside there. And we can see that inside we have text color black. Okay, it's not very pretty, but at least it's organized and we can see what we have here. We have the style guide. We're ready to start building.